Hello and welcome back to At First Glance with Jared Wasson.
And Pastor Michael Miller.
Today we are going to be going through Luke 10.
Luke 9.
Luke 9. Oh my goodness. It says Luke 10 at the top of my page.
Yep. It's the end of chapter 9.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so end of chapter 9, Luke 9, 51 through 62.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. Is there anything we want to say before we get started, or should we just dive right into it?
Let's dive right in.
All right. So when the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers ahead of him. On their way, they entered the village of the Samaritans to make ready for him. But they did not receive him, because his face was set towards Jerusalem. When his disciples James and John saw it, they said, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" But he turned and rebuked them. Then they went on to the village, another village. As they were going along the road, someone said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." To another he said, "Follow me." But he said, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God." Another said, "I will follow you, Lord, but first let me say farewell to those at my home." Jesus said to him, "No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God." He was like, "We got a harsh word there, Pastor."
Yeah, what strikes me is the urgency.
It's very urgent. Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Don't do this, come and follow me.
Mm-hmm.
This is more important than anything else you got going on.
Mm-hmm. And some of those things are pretty important.
And some of those things are very important, like burying your father, saying goodbye to the people at your home. If I just walked out on the street, if I was like, imagine, okay, I'm taking out my garbage. Jesus is walking on the sidewalk and he's like, "Hey, follow me." I'm like, I gotta go say bye to like my son who's just inside hanging out. Jesus is like, "No, we gotta go." I'd be like, "That's pretty hard, Jesus." Yeah. But that's what he's asking these people to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's the urgency?
What's the urgency? That's a really good question, especially at this point. Especially at this point in the gospel, because we hear at the start of this that Jesus, in those days, set his face to go to Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And if we've read this whole story, and we tell this story every year,
mm-hmm.
As the church. Not particularly from Luke's gospel, but the story of Jesus, who begins preaching and teaching and healing and casting out demons like we saw last week. But then at some point, the tension with the Jewish leaders, with the Romans, turns and he ends up on a cross.
Yeah.
So there's limited time. He's turning toward Jerusalem, knowing that's what's awaiting him. Yeah. And so teaching people what the kingdom of God is all about is the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what is God's purpose? What does community look like in God's vision? Jesus is living that out. He's teaching it. But the time is limited, so I think that's the urgency.
Yeah. One of the things that stood out to me was right in the beginning. They're on their way to a Samaritan village, but they did not receive him because his face was set towards Jerusalem, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
Why would they not receive him? Because he was headed towards Jerusalem.
Well, the Samaritans and the Jews are two different communities within Israel. It goes back to past history,
Mm-hmm.
At a point when the North and the South became separated from each other, and then other empires took over, and people settled in the North who weren't Jewish, and there was a mixture of religious practices. And the people in the north had their own place to worship, and in the kingdom of the south, it remained Jerusalem where the temple was. So they had their conflicts and their religious understandings, and the kind of distrust and the hatred that grows around that was present there. So we hear it pretty starkly.
So as soon as they figured out he was going to Jerusalem,
you're not one of us.
Yeah. That's kind of sad. When I think of Samaritans, I think of the Good Samaritan. I don't know if a lot of people do that, but I do. But not all Samaritans were good. I mean, a lot of them were so focused on their identity as a people that to help the Jewish people would have been just a terrible thing for them to do. And in my own life,
from the Jewish perspective, they wouldn't have expected the Samaritan to be of help. So
exactly, but in my own life,
it's a great story that kind of twists expectations.
Yeah, in my own life, I wonder, am I so focused on any parts of my life that I treat people like this, or I treat situations like this where I shouldn't? And that's a little bit of a, what's the word I'm looking for? It hurts my heart a little bit, knowing that I probably have done this, and I probably am doing this currently. So I like this gospel passage because it's encouraging me to reflect on that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's important to recognize. I think all of us have those preconceived notions about people, and are, Jesus here doesn't accept James and John's response. Well, we'll
bring
down fire from heaven. And it's like,
and there's precedent for that because the prophet Elijah did that exact thing. But Jesus rebuked them, saying, "We're not doing that."
Yeah.
And I'm wondering why was it okay in the Old Testament but not in the New Testament? One of the things I think about is that the Old Testament is about just a people. God is making them His people, and then for the New Testament, it's going into all the world. So there is no dividing walls anymore between Samaritans and Jews, between Americans and Mexicans, between communists and capitalists. Those dividing walls don't stand anymore. Not when we're following Jesus.
Yeah, that's an important revelation that happens in the New Testament. It makes me think of that reading from a couple weeks ago about the Spirit of Truth leading us into all truth. I think there's this continuing deepening of awareness and understanding of who God is and what God intends for us and for the creation. And I think that that unfolding is present within the Scriptures too. So we looked to Jesus as that key person who makes the love and the life of God known to us. And here he's just going off to another place. He's not engaging that. His face is set to Jerusalem. But those who would follow him, there's that intense urgency.
Absolutely, yeah. Do we still have that urgency? I mean, Jesus has now been crucified 2,000 years ago. Do we still have that sense of urgency to go and proclaim His word?
I think that's one of the good questions that we can all think about as we listen more deeply to this passage. What is that urgency for us now? What does the call to follow Jesus mean? And where is the tension in our own lives?
Yeah.
What are the things that we're holding on to that we need to let go of in order to really enter into that call? At least that's the question that comes to mind for me as I hear this. In some sense, I think this is an exaggeration. Like, you wouldn't drop your trash and leave your young son in the house and never go back.
Right, and I don't think
Um,
Jesus would ask me to
Yeah.
if there was not another option.
Right.
You know?
But this sort of exaggerated sense of the
Yeah.
urgency is what challenges us to think about, well, what am I holding on to
Mhm.
that I really don't need to if this is the most important calling in my life?
Yeah, one of the Ten Commandments are called to mind, to not make idols. I've heard an idol defined as anything more important than God.
Mhm.
And I think that's a good definition of an idol.
Mhm.
So it is that question of what is in my life holding me back from a true relationship with Christ.
Mhm.
And that takes a lot of discernment. It takes a lot of prayer to figure those things out. And then when you do figure it out, it takes a lot of effort to actually let go of those things.
Mhm.
So, do you have any tips on how we might be able to do just that, to help us free ourselves from our own idols that we may or may not realize are idols?
Well, I mean, I think this process is an important piece of that. You know, if we read the scriptures and we pay attention and start to recognize these questions that come to mind, and then write them down.
Yeah.
You know, so that we don't just forget about them, but that we can come back to that and keep asking, keep exploring, keep listening. Because, you know, at first response, you know, what's holding me back? I maybe don't have anything that comes to mind. But
Right.
if I keep paying attention, I may start to notice that.
Yes.
The Spirit will speak into my life as I'm asking that question. Well, what about this piece? And like you said, it takes discernment. It takes some time. And this whole process that we're practicing here of listening to the text, asking the questions, looking for the connections, chewing on that, and then praying for the Spirit to lead us to new action. That process will bring us to that place, but requires some slowing down.
I'm really excited to go through this process with you on this podcast. Do you have any closing thoughts about this gospel reading?
About this gospel reading, I think that what's at the center here is this call to be the followers of Jesus, and not to assume that it's going to be easy. That's the first warning.
Yeah.
One says, "I'll follow you wherever you go," but
you know where he's going.
It's not so easy. It's
Right.
going to be a challenge. And others who are called to follow have these objections. Jesus' intent is that people would follow him and learn this way of life. But as he begins this journey toward Jerusalem, which will be the context for all the readings that follow for the next few months, on this journey, he's going to be teaching people what that means. To be his apprentices, to be his students, to live this way of life. It'll be challenging, but it will be life-giving.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us this week on At First Glance. We'll see you next week.